So my name is Philip Holloway. I am the WSB legal analyst for WSB Radio. I was an early adopter with respect to COVID-19. I got sick in late March, early April of 2020. I don't know exactly how or where I contracted it, but I know that it came on really suddenly. I just was at home one day and it was shortly after dinner, and I started feeling really, really tired. And I went to my room and I laid down on my bed around 8 p.m. and then I started having some chills. And right away, I realized that something was off. And I didn't really assume it was COVID right away, but I did feel like this was something unusual. I don't know where we got it or where I got it at the time. My wife did later get it, but 2 months after me. I don't know where I got it, but I've got some suspicions. It may have been on a commercial flight back from Montana, but who knows? It could have also been at the grocery store. It could have been at a gas station. It could have been at the courthouse. There's just no way to know. But in any event, it didn't take me long to figure out that something very, very different, because this was an illness that I had not really experienced anything like before. I've had bouts of the flu, which frankly, influenza gets a lot of comparisons to COVID. Influenza was, at least in my memory, for when I've had the flu, it's usually very intense, but it only lasts for a few days, right? This never really got that intense, with a couple of exceptions, but it just dragged on and on and on over, a couple of weeks, give or take, maybe even a little bit longer. But the worst of the symptoms for me were really high fever. I can't remember the last time I spiked a fever of 103, but I did. But the thing about the fever is it wasn't constant. I would wake up in the morning, I'd take my temperature and it would be normal. And then, I'm feeling pretty good in the morning. And then by lunchtime, I get really, really tired again. And the fever starts going up. So Tylenol was my friend. I lived in my basement for the better part of 2 weeks. And, I felt almost like I was in, jail, because my wife, bless her heart, she was feeding me by putting my food, like she'd open the door and place the food on the top step and close the door, and I'd come up and get my food. But fortunately, I have a comfortable basement where I made it my home. Look, I had my things I needed to work. I was able to get work done. I was productive. I even did some live television interviews on national TV, during COVID, and you couldn't tell I was even sick. So all things being equal, I was fairly lucky, although the extreme fatigue and the things that go along with the fever were really the worst of it for me. I have some medical people in my immediate family that I was using to sort of guide me through this. I after a few days, we kind of knew that I had it because of the clinical symptoms. This was at a point in time when testing was just getting ramped up, and it was kind of a hassle to go get tested. And I'm thinking, well, what's the point of getting tested if it's not going to affect how I'm dealing with this? But eventually I did find a place that was relatively convenient, and it was one of these family clinics, that, I don't want to say a doc in a box, but maybe kind of like that. But they had a testing regimen where you just drove through their back parking lot and they did outside testing. I literally drove up to this place in my vehicle and did a telemedicine visit from the parking lot. And then I drove around back and I got 2 swabs. One was for influenza and the other one was for COVID-19. Now of course, the flu was a rapid test, and 10 minutes later, we knew it was negative. So I'm assuming it's COVID-19. And 2 days later, that test result for COVID-19 came back negative. And I said, that can't be right. I never trusted that test. I knew that I had COVID. I said, this is crazy. Anyway, eventually, after I got over it, I went and got tested for the antibodies, and lo and behold, that proved that I had it. It turns out that the specimen was mishandled somewhere. I think it was probably left outside in that parking lot in the sun for too long, but it invalidated or negated the results of the test. But there's no question that I had it. The antibodies proved that. So that was really my only visit to a health professional. We knew that I was sick. We knew that I wasn't in dire straits. I knew that if I developed severe problems with breathing and things like that, I could have gone to the hospital. But, other than that, I just carried on. I was living in my basement and I was doing my work, got to watch a lot of television, got to binge a lot of Netflix, and my socialization was on the kids' Xbox. I was playing video games with some of my lawyer friends, and, even judges and police officers. We were all, playing online video games together. And that's how I socialized during that time. The onset of the symptoms was fairly rapid. I mean, that first night that I experienced the chills, and the fever, it got worse pretty quickly. Within a day or two, the fever started getting higher and higher, and the fatigue was just off the charts extreme. That persisted for several days. I would say the better part of 7 or 8, maybe 10 days is when I had the fever. But the thing about the fever is it was not constant. I would be okay in the morning. I'd actually feel good. The temperature was low, and then it would gradually rise during the day. And by bedtime, and by that I mean 8 or 9 o'clock at this point, because I was so tired, I knew that my fever was going to get higher overnight, as it always would. So I would take a couple of Tylenol and start watching Netflix on my iPad until I fell asleep. And that was just and I'd stay in bed as late as I wanted, because I knew that I needed to rest. I knew my body did not need a lot of exertion. So I just sort of pushed through it with Tylenol, and I never lost an appetite. So I stayed fed and I stayed hydrated and took a lot of vitamin D. I'm a big believer in vitamin D. I had been diagnosed as vitamin D deficient, and a lot of adults, as we age, our vitamin D levels naturally go down, but that's a big component of your immune system. So I made sure to keep taking my vitamin D supplements, and I think I actually took a little bit more at my doctor's suggestion than I might normally take. And I was taking also at their suggestion mega doses of vitamin C, because you want your immune system to be strong. They say your immune system is not able to cope with COVID. Well, it is, and it does in the overwhelming majority of people. My immune system did exactly what nature intended for it to do, and it worked fine. It had a reaction, but it did its job. But I wanted to make sure my immune system had everything that it needed, all the building blocks. And so I made sure I took those vitamins, and I just powered through the worst of the symptoms with just Tylenol, quite frankly. Not much more than that. My family, they were exposed to me before we sort of figured out, hey, I need to retreat to the basement. And they never got it. They never got it, even though I was on the tail end of it. And quite frankly, my doctor said probably by that point, even though I still had some mild symptoms, I probably was not contagious at that point. So that worked out okay. Interestingly enough, a couple of months later, my wife got it. Hers was a good bit shorter. Now, she's a little younger than me, but her symptoms were similar to mine, but I don't think her fever was quite as high, and hers only lasted 3 or 4 days. She had a bout of it, but she approached me and was, do we want to go give antibodies, right, to the Red Cross? They need this plasma for this antibody treatment. And I'm like, sure. But I wanted to make sure that I still had them, because we were hearing all these things about the antibodies might wear off. And so I wanted to make sure that I still had them. So I went and got another antibody test, and lo and behold, my levels of antibodies were higher than they were the first time after I was acutely ill. My doctor tells me that that's because my immune system was doing what it was designed to do. I was clearly re-exposed to someone. It turns out to be my wife, but there was also a coworker that right around that time had it. Now, I wasn't in close contact with that coworker, but I was clearly re-exposed. I never got sick. I was never contagious. When my wife got it, I even got, another COVID test, which was negative, but I did go back and get an antibody test. And the second time, the antibodies were higher. Both kinds of antibodies, the IgG and the IgE, they were both higher. And my doctor's explanation, and it makes perfectly good sense. He says, what happened is your immune system recognized this now. It's almost like I was vaccinated with the real thing, right? With the real virus. My body recognized it. My body responded to it. And my antibodies spun back up. So, I know that the science is mixed on this, but I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. People can have different opinions about this immunity. And I'm not saying I'm absolutely never going to get it or I'm immune to it, but I know that my own body's immune system did develop some degree of immunity, and it protected me. Okay. And it protected me from getting sick again when people that I was in the same home with and I was exposed to had it. So I know it worked. Whether or not that's going to last for the duration until there's a vaccine, I don't know. But I do have faith in a healthy immune system to be able to fight this virus. Obviously, some people can't. Some people don't have healthy immune systems. And unfortunately, a lot of people have other comorbidities, they have other illnesses. They may have diabetes. Just last year, fortunately, I took it upon myself. I was overweight, so I lost about 50 pounds on purpose in 2019. And I'm really glad that I did that, because I feel like if I hadn't, maybe I would have developed some more severe illness when I had COVID-19. But in retrospect, I think that going through it and experiencing it early in this pandemic, relatively early, has made me feel a lot more confident that we're going to get through this. Because even people who test positive, that doesn't mean they're sick. Some are, and obviously some, don't do as well as I did. And I fully understand that, but most fortunately do. A virus is going to do what viruses do. That's nature. We can no more stop a virus from going viral, so to speak, than we can stop a hurricane from coming on shore. So we can take reasonable steps to protect ourselves, and we can protect vulnerable people in particular. But I'm a big believer that, I know my life has to go on. I can't live my life consumed by worrying about this virus. And I would encourage everybody to be respectful of the virus, have a healthy respect for all of us, and not transmitting it where possible. I'm not saying to ignore it, but I think that we can't let our lives revolve around the worry and the fear of this virus, which will affect most people the way that it did me. So was it fun? No, it wasn't fun. It was a pain and it was a hassle. But honestly, I didn't mind living in my basement for a couple of weeks. I was productive. I was able to manage the symptoms. If I needed to get out of the house, I would walk out the side door and get in my vehicle, and I would close up all the windows, and I'd go for a drive to see the scenery and not worry about exposing anybody. So, I would just encourage people to be aware of it and to be respectful of the virus. It's definitely worthy of our respect, but don't let it consume your life. We've got to stay strong and carry on. We've got, as a lawyer, I've got clients that are in jail that need out, that they need my assistance. They need me to be here doing work for them on their behalf, because just because there's a virus, it doesn't mean their case is going to go away. And so they need me working, they need me functioning. And I try to focus on living my life and doing the things that I need to do, but also being mindful of not making it dangerous for other people. So we're reopening the courts. We're about to start jury trials. It's going to be very interesting to see what that's like. I've done more court hearings by Zoom and similar platforms than I thought I'd ever do. I was picking up my daughter from school the other day, and I'm doing a juvenile court hearing while I'm waiting for her in the line to pick up kids, at carpool. I never would have imagined I'd be doing a hearing in juvenile court on my cell phone, while I'm waiting to pick up my child from school. I never would have thought I would be doing that. But hey, we do what we have to do to make it work. My big takeaway is that we have to live life. The world hasn't stopped turning. We have to maintain friendships. We have to maintain relationships with human beings. We have to maintain physical contact with human beings, especially our family and friends. So social distancing is important, and all of the safety precautions are important, but we don't need to let those concerns consume us, because it is possible to live a not completely normal life compared to a year ago, but it is possible to maintain some sense of normalcy, and we will get through this. This pandemic will end, and we need to not be afraid to touch another human being forever. Okay, we've got to shake hands, we've got to give hugs, and we've got to be humans, because this virus cannot destroy us unless we let it destroy ourselves.